leave of absence because an awkward position since the course changed in the year between this year and last year. Right, so this is the module where you put into practice everything that we did last semester. But you don't just put into practice what you've learned in that module, you're drawing upon a lot of knowledge from other modules as well. I'll talk a bit about it. Originally when it was timetabled, all we had were the 2-hour sessions on a Wednesday afternoon. And they're in a computer lab, and you'll be doing software development in those labs. And I decided that really we needed a few introductory lectures to get the ball rolling. So these ones on the Monday afternoon have been added to the timetable, but it's only for the first 5 weeks. Right? So today what I want to talk about is why we're doing this module, the aims, what project we're looking at, the support, the resources, the assessment, and so on. About what it means to be working with a client, and I'll explain why client is inverted commas there in a minute. I'll talk about the development process that I'm expecting you to use, the schedule, and the next steps. So first of all, let's start off with the aims and objectives of this module, which is taken from the module description. So the first aim is to provide an insight into the more practical aspects of the taught modules which are within this program that you're studying. Okay? So not just software engineering that we did last semester, but the other taught modules as well. And the second aim is to provide experience in team software project management. Now I know from reading your reflective reports last semester that some of you do have experience in this area. Maybe not very strong on the software side, some of you have done more engineering projects with a bit of software in them, that type of thing, but some of you have done project management before. So you should excel in this aspect of this module. That's a great thing. Okay, so they're the 2 aims, and the only 2 aims for this module. Many modules have 4 or 5 aims, this one's only got 2. Then we'll look at the learning outcomes or objectives. Number 1 is to develop commercial and industrial dimensions of software engineering, including databases, the internet, and interoperability. Okay? And for this module, that means building a database-backed website. Okay? That is accessible on multiple different platforms. Describe human, social, and professional issues relating to the application of computing. Now, we've already looked at those last semester in the software engineering module. You will have more personal experience of them, having done this one, is the idea. Apply the software engineering process, taking a project through the stages of software lifecycle from the original client interviews through to design, implementation and testing and deployment, not maintenance. I can only ask you to do so much in 12 weeks. And demonstrate team working skills, including personal responsibility and group management ability, interpersonal communication skills, leadership and delegation, and the ability to plan and meet deadlines. Okay? So all of these things you should achieve by the end of this module. And in order to do that, you're going to be working on a team project. Now you're going to be working on that project in teams of 5 or 6 people, and I've asked you to all submit your preferences. I haven't looked to see if everybody's done it yet, but the deadline is at 5 o'clock this afternoon. So first thing tomorrow morning, I will be forming those teams, right? And you should get together with the people in your team before the 4 o'clock session on Wednesday. Okay, even if it's just half an hour before that shouldn't be necessary, but just to meet up and make sure you know who you're working with and what you're going to be talking about. So let's talk about the project though. So it's a real project. Okay, so Pi Wars is a robotics competition in which teams have to build and deploy a Raspberry Pi-based robot to compete in a series of challenges. And if you want to find out more about it, you can go to that website. You're not building a robot, don't worry. Okay, you're not doing that. There are 2 days of competitions with schools and other children's clubs on the first day, and an open competition divided into 3 categories, beginners, intermediates, and advanced or professional, on the second day. So each of the teams has to do a series of challenges on its day, and these challenges are staffed by volunteers in shifts, about 2 hours each, over the whole, usually a 10-hour day. And each of the volunteers records the results for the bit that they're looking at, and then they all get relayed back to a central collection point, and the overall scores are calculated. This competition's in its 4th year this year, so it's been running for several years now, and it gets bigger every year. And there's more teams to cope with, and more volunteers to cope with, and that sort of thing. And every year, something goes wrong with the scoring process. The most basic one, and perhaps the easiest one to fix, if it's detected, is that the scores get tallied incorrectly. But more critically, sometimes results go missing, because they're all being recorded at one point, taken to a central point, put into a pile, and then somebody else transcribes it into a computer system, and things go astray. Okay? So what they want is a software system that will allow the volunteers to log on to a website, record the results for the bit that they're looking at, and then that all gets centrally put into a database, and then the people who normally would be collating all the results at a central point, they can just look it up on the database and do the summary statistics, and everything gets calculated automatically. Okay, so it should help to, if not eliminate those problems, then greatly alleviate them. Right? It'll also have some added benefits in that they can do sanity checking quite easily on different volunteers' recordings and that sort of thing. Like if one volunteer seems to have highly favourable results for a particular challenge over all of the other volunteers, then they can flag this as potentially needing moderation and look at that easily, so they can do some sort of higher level analysis of the way things are progressing. So, in order to do this, we've got the usual resource of MOL. So I will put all the material that I do in the lectures and so on. We also have a tool called EpiManage. EpiManage is a project management tool that includes things like timesheets and storyboards, a Kanban system, tools for managing your project. Okay? And I would highly recommend that you make use of these facilities. You don't have to, apart from the timesheets. I want everyone in this module to be recording the time that they take, that they spend, whether it's in class like this, okay, you would record this as 1 hour of training, right? Or if it's working individually on development, you would record that as development. Or if it's working individually on testing, record it as testing. Or if you're having a team meeting, record it as a meeting. All these sorts of things. Right? I'd also like you to be quite formal about organising meetings and recording meetings. I would like you to have an agenda for any meeting that you set forward, just in bullet point form, 4 or 5 items usually is all you would want. And record minutes for it. Okay, so who said what and who said they were going to do what, so that you have a record afterwards, so that when somebody comes back and said, I thought you said you were going to do this, you can go back to your minutes and say, no, look, we agreed, it's written down here that we did that. Now, in order to do that, I would suggest that you set up a shared folder on your Google Drive, okay, with your team, once you know who's in your team, so that you can all access the same documents and files about your meetings. I would strongly recommend keeping your development stuff in a shared folder on your Google Drive as well. Okay, and of course, the third point is your other modules are going to make a big contribution to this one. Okay, so I'm not in this module teaching you new technical material. It is just bringing together that knowledge that you've been learning in terms of Java development, in terms of web development, in terms of database-backed websites, which I know you haven't done yet, apart from the tiny bit we touched upon in software engineering, but you will do in your web module this semester. And I'm coordinating with the lecturer of that module to make sure that you get the material soon enough in that module that it is useful in this module. Okay, so don't worry about the fact that you don't know that yet. You will when the time comes to it. Assessment. This is always an issue for undergraduates, perhaps less so for master students, but still useful to know. There's three main components to the assessment. First of all, from the client perspective of the delivered systems, there's a T mark of 50%. Now, I said I'd get to why client is in inverted commas. So, the actual clients for this system are based in Cambridge, right? The people who run the competition. It's not feasibly possible to get them here to do it, so they've agreed that I can act as their representative. I have a good knowledge of the competition and how the volunteer system works and that sort of thing. They're happy for me to act as the client. What this means is that in those Wednesday sessions that we have, for the first 5 weeks, I'm going to be going along not as an instructor, but as a client. And I'll spend half an hour with each team, and you get to do knowledge elicitation on me. Okay, so you ask me questions about what I want of the system, as if I was a real client. I am the representative of the client, right? So when I'm looking at assessing the system, and I may get involvement from people in Cambridge to look at this if time permits and that sort of thing, otherwise I will be judging myself. I will be looking at the satisfaction with the product that is being produced, how well it does what I wanted it to do, how well you've interacted with me as a client. Okay? So on Wednesdays, for the first 5 weeks, treat me as your client. Okay? Make it professional. That's what I'm saying. About whether there are any obvious bugs in the system, my perspective of the system from a client's view, I'm going to be, and I'll give you, if you look on Mold, you'll see a much more detailed breakdown of how that works, right? Then I'll be looking at team processes. So I will be keeping an eye on it in the first 5 weeks, but from week 6, I will actually be going to those Wednesday sessions and monitoring very carefully team progress and not just your team progress, but your team interactions and how you're working together and who's doing what. And doesn't mean that everybody's making exactly the same contribution to the team. Different people will contribute in different ways. I acknowledge that. That's absolutely fine and expected. But that's what I'll be looking at in terms of the team evaluation there, both in terms of how well you're meeting milestones and progress on your project and how well you're working together as a team. Okay. I will look at things like your record of meeting minutes and things. At the end, you will be asked to submit these as part of the assessment process, so that we can see that you have been recording these things accurately, so that we can see records that people have been doing what they were said they would do or not doing, as the case may be, right? That sort of thing. And then there's a small component of individual assessment, which is 10% of that is your written reflective report, so a much smaller reflective report than last semester, which is particularly going to be focusing on team process type things. You get detailed instructions for that curriculum this semester. 5% of that is my evaluation of you as an individual and how you've been contributing to your team throughout semester. As I said, I'll be monitoring it every week. We also apply peer assessment to team marks. So obviously not the individual component, but for the ones which are marked as a team, so 85% of it, what will happen is I'll ask each of you to give a weighting for how much contribution, relatively contribution, each member of the team, including yourself, made towards your overall team performance. You might decide that everybody put in equal amount of effort, and that's absolutely fine and desirable, okay? Equal amount of effort doesn't mean you all did exactly the same things. As I said, you might have strengths and weaknesses and you take advantage of them. But if you think that the work was distributed fairly throughout your team, you give everybody an equal ranking, and there will be no weighting applied to the team component. If you have somebody who makes no contribution at all, you know, just never shows up, their name is in your team but you've never seen them, they have never responded to an email or done anything for your team, you give them 0 and everybody else 100%. Then the rest of the team will get the team mark and the person who did 0 will get nothing. Okay? Now, I don't think that's going to happen in this class, right? Because I know you all, and you all worked last semester, so it'd be surprising if you didn't work this semester. Okay? It does happen in our undergraduate classes sometimes that students get 0 for that reason. But you might decide that somebody has been making a contribution but being a bit slack and just not making the effort that you thought that they should make, right? So maybe you decide everybody else has been giving equal effort, but that one person has only been given a 70% effort. So you could give you and your teammates 100 and the other person 70. If you all do that, and the other person, well, it doesn't, if you get 5 people who give one person 70 and everybody else 100, it doesn't make a huge difference what that other person ranks everybody as. They will end up getting a smaller proportion of the team, a proportionately small bit of the team mark. Okay? So it's our way of trying to ensure that there's fairness. Now, having said that, you most definitely have different strengths and weaknesses, right? You're all coming from different backgrounds. Some of you have a computer science background, and I think that you ended up in SSIT because you started in data analytics. You decided you didn't want to do data analytics, so you got transferred to SSIT because people in SSIT are not meant to have a computer science background. So for the 3 of you who in your reflective report said that you did, you have a strong advantage over the other students here. Okay? But the point is that most of you, the vast majority of you, haven't done computer science before. Some of you, though, have done programming. Others have done none. And this is the first time you've been exposed to programming. So don't expect everybody to be able to do the same thing as you, is my point. And don't just tell somebody to do something if it's patently obvious that they don't have the ability to do it. Either work together as a team to bring up the skills of the entire team, and that's a really good thing to do, and I would encourage it. Or decide that, okay, so you're weak in this area, but you're good at this thing, so do this thing instead. Where, you know, one thing might be the documentation, and the other thing is the implementation. Or it might be the graphic design at the front end as opposed to the database design at the back end. There are different things that you can do, and you don't all have to do exactly the same thing. comes to working with your client in these Wednesday sessions for the first 5 weeks, the requirements are vital for any software project. You need to make sure that you are capturing the correct thing when you write it down. And you need to prioritize things. You've got a short amount of time. Okay? 12 weeks, 15 weeks if you count Easter, but I'm not expecting you to work over Easter. You need to decide what are the essential requirements of this piece of software, what are the desirable but not essential requirements, and what are the optional requirements. The things, the bells and whistles, that'd be kind of nice if you did it, but they're not absolutely critical. Okay? If you could put in everything, all the bells and whistles and everything, fantastic. The client will be very happy. If you put in all of the essentials and the desirables, probably fantastic, the client will be really happy. The idea is that the bells and whistles don't really matter that much, but and the desirables, you know, they'd be nice, and if you do them all for me, that's fantastic. If you put in the essentials, the client will be happy. Maybe not very happy, but they'll be happy. They'll have a functional product that they can use. If you fail to meet those essential requirements, it doesn't matter how many of the desirable or the optional requirements you've done, if you fail to do the essential ones, the client's not going to be happy. Okay? So prioritizing is important. And the last point, the basic quality is important. The client wants something that we can use. Okay, so you might, in some sense, have implemented all the essential requirements, but if it is so painful to use that they go back to pencil and paper, it's not a useful system. Right? You could say, actually, that you hadn't met all of the essential requirements there, because an essential requirement probably is to do with usability, a non-functional requirement. Depends how you record them, of course. Okay, so as I said, the first 5 weeks of semester, you get half an hour per week with me as your client during the 2-hour lab session. You should be focusing on the requirements for those 5 weeks, developing them further each week, going away after the meeting, starting to think, starting to plan, how's it all going to fit together. As you do that planning, more questions about the requirements will come up, right? So use that time in between to plan what you're going to ask in the next week's session with the clients. So give serious thought to how you're going to capture those requirements. I would strongly recommend using storybook boards, so short cards with, you know, each thing captures a paragraph at most, maybe just a sentence. Match your priorities to deadlines, implement your requirements in priority order, and manage your work carefully. So you're going to have, out of that 2-hour lab session, 1.5 hours where you're not with me. You could, if you wanted to, just go, right? Just come for the half-hour meeting. If that's what you want, decide as a team, works for you. But you know how scarce lab space is in the university and how hard it is to get a computer sometime. So I would recommend you use the lab as you can, right? But if you find it difficult working in a noisy space, you know, with the whole class in there, and you'd rather go to a quiet room on your own and work in a quiet space, you can do that too. Right? You do have to turn up at least for the half hour with me. I will be checking attendance every week. And this is a 15 credit module, right? So that means approximately 150 hours work over the semester. I expect when I do look at the timesheets at the end of semester to see about 150 hours per person in those timesheets. It's not going to be exact, okay? You know, If it's, even if it's 120, I'm not really going to be too worried. Below that, I'll start saying, well, you don't think you've done really the right effort in this thing. But some people will do all they need to do in 100. Some people work more efficiently, that sort of thing. Some people will put more than 150 hours in. If you go over 180 hours, I'll start saying to you, I think there's something going wrong with your team. You shouldn't need to be putting in this sort of effort, right? So, and I do expect to see some sort of balance amongst the team as well. If there's one person who's logging a lot fewer hours than the rest of the team, that's a reason for concern. So these sorts of things come into play. Right, but what it means, you're not going to get 150 hours by coming to one lecture plus 1 2-hour lab class per week. Right? Nowhere near it. So you need to work out how you're going to do that rest of the time. How much of it is going to be you meeting together as a team and working as a team? How much will be just you meeting with another person from your team maybe and doing pair programming? Might be an effective way to do things. How much of it is going to be you working on your own? All right? So you think about it. For the development process, I'm expecting you to use an agile approach. Normally, as we discussed last semester, agile would involve sprints of between 2 and 4 weeks. Because of the time constraints of this project, I'm suggesting you go for very short sprints of a week. Right? So every week, look at how much you can do in that week, and then work on that sort of cycle. If you decide at some point that you have a block of work that really can't be done in a week and you're going to need 2 weeks to do it, okay, make that sprint a bit longer, right? But I would say don't go beyond 2 weeks for a project on this sort of time scale. Further requirements, as I said, I recommend using story cards. I'd also recommend mock-ups for when you're doing the front-end design. So rather than just going straight to implementing what your web page would look like, draw some user interfaces. Present it to your client. Say, does this look like something that would be usable for this situation? That type of thing. As I said, with implementation, small manageable chunks. Use your Kanban board. If you're using story cards, amongst the tools in EpiManage is a Kanban board where you can move your story cards across to track their progress through the requirements capture, the design, the implementation, the testing, and so on. You don't have to, but you might consider using Git. Right? Now, for our undergraduate projects like this, we do ask people to use Git. Git is a software management system, a revision management system, whereby you can keep track of all the changes to the code as you go along. It's particularly useful when you've got multiple people working on the same project. You can see who's made what changes at any time, and it's tracked. Okay? The reason I say you don't have to use it is that I'm worried that it might just be overload in terms of things. So I'd suggest once the teams are formed tomorrow morning, you get together with your team and you decide whether you want to develop the skills to use that or not. If you've got expertise, if somebody in your team has already used it and is well familiar with it, then that might be a sensible thing to do. But if you don't use Git, make sure that you keep backups, that you know which is the current version, that you know how things change, you know who's made what change, you track your changes in some way. Right? Don't get to the state where everything is broken and you've got no idea how to get it back to a working state. Right? Don't do that. Practice continuous integration. So once you've got a prototype working on your web page, right? then keep a working prototype there and just keep updating it to add more features as you develop more features, right? Don't put anything into the working system unless you're sure that it is working. Test it separately first, right? So again, you've always got that working system. And don't forget to do the testing, both unit testing, the individual components that you're developing, and system testing of the system as a whole. Teams are expected to be self-managing. Okay? Facilitators, as me, will be focusing on whether it's working in those weekly meetings. Okay? It's pretty obvious, I know from experience, to tell whether things aren't working as a team. I have had cases where I've had a team which was totally dysfunctional and nobody worked with anybody else. But only once, right? Most of the time, though, that it's a case of one or two individuals who take charge of the team and don't let anybody else do things, or one or two individuals who just don't contribute to the team. Both are as bad as each other, okay? Talk to your team members. If you don't understand things, let them know. If you think they're making the wrong choices, let them know. If you think there's a better way of doing things, let them, talk. Don't just sit back and go, and let them drive the thing. Right? Work as a team. So as I said, as individuals, you need to record your time using EpiManage, and you've got a responsibility to your team members to do what you agreed to do when you said you would do it. Sometimes you won't be able to for one reason or another, if you get sick. Or if you do reach a bug that you just can't figure out what's wrong with this bug and you spend hours on it when you thought it would take 5 minutes, that type of thing. Don't struggle in silence. You are part of a team. Let the team know what your problems are, and hopefully other team members will be able to help you surmount those problems. Whether if you're unwell, by taking some of your work and letting you catch up after you get better again. If it's when you're stuck on a bug, sometimes a fresh pair of eyes can just find a bug like that. Sometimes you just can't see it for looking at it, that type of thing. So work together as a team. And as a team, as I said, I want formal agendas and minutes for your meetings. And ultimately, you need to deliver the required product and supporting documentation. So we're going to have 4 teams working independently on the same project. And I'll rank those two. There'll be a winning team at the end who I determine as having the best product. Okay? That will be solely based on the client perspective. So it doesn't mean it's the team that's going to get the top marks, because you might do really well in the product, but not so well in the teamwork aspect of things, or something like that, right? But I'll make a judgment as a client about which one is the best product. And by best, I mean the one that satisfies my needs, so it does everything that I want it to, but where you've gone above and beyond that, where you've perhaps anticipated new possibilities for doing things, or you've done a really nice interface design, or there's extra stuff in there that I hadn't thought about. Okay? Because often when you go to your client, that is the case. Right? You'll have different ideas, and your ideas could easily be valuable. Okay, so for the teaching in this module, you should be using knowledge from other modules. Of course, from 6105 last semester that I taught, but also from, at the very least, your Introduction to Object-Oriented Programming, your Advanced Java, and the web module that you're doing this semester. So all of those things will contribute, right? I'm not particularly fussed about how you do the implementation so long as it's functional. Okay, so you decide which particular software you're going to use to build the website and the database and so on. As I said, you will be learning about databases for websites in the web module, so before you make any firm decisions on that, wait till you've covered that material. Right? In any case, you'll be doing the front-end design before you do the database. Right? You can start thinking about what tables you might have in your database, because that's kind of independent of the particular implementation that you have, right? But the actual implementation of the database will come later. Okay, so that live class every Wednesday with me as client for the first 5 weeks, and for the final demo in the week immediately following the Easter break. Okay? And with me and my staff role at every other session, you're expected to attend every one of those lab classes up to and including week 11, so 2 weeks after Easter. I won't have one in the last week of semester. Right? You will be finishing off the final tweaks to your report and stuff at that stage. You shouldn't be doing any development. You might be doing tiny bug fixes, but it should be essentially complete in terms of software at that point. And as I said, you're expected to do a lot of independent or teamwork. Milestones. So, week 1, ignore the 2. Copy this. So this module is shadowing very closely one of our undergraduate modules, which I'm also teaching this semester. The difference is they're using a lot more restrictive about the technology that they can use. So they have to use Ruby on Rails, but they've done Ruby before. And so Rails is the only new technology they have to learn. I think when I say Ruby on Rails, most of you probably have no idea what I'm talking about, so I certainly wouldn't expect you to learn a whole new technology for that, right? Which is why I'm saying you just do regular web pages with Java or JavaScript and databases, whatever you're most comfortable with. Right? Week 3, I'm expecting to see a mock-up demo, as in just the look of what it's going to look like as a presentation in the Wednesday session. Okay, so by then you should have a pretty good idea about what different aspects of the website should look like. So there's going to be one view for the people who are the volunteers who are staffing the different challenge stations. There's going to be another view for the administrators who are pulling together all the information and doing sanity checking on it and that sort of thing. And as you talk to me, you might decide there are other views that are important as well. And I'll leave that to you in your knowledge elicitation sessions. Okay. By week 5, that's the last session that I'll be coming to as a client. I want another demo, possibly as a live website at that stage, but probably with no functionality, so still just the way it looks rather than any sort of things happening behind the web page. The one in week 3 can be pen and paper, right? Or it could be, you could do it with Photoshop or some sort of drawing tool, something like that. But week 5, probably the start of the website. By week 9, which is the week before the Easter break, you should have your final demo at least planned, if not fully complete. Right? As I said, you are not expected to work during the Easter break. Some of you might have plans already to do things during the Easter break, and that is fine. Just let your team know that that's the case. If anybody feels that their team is pressuring them to work during the Easter break when they don't want to, then you should let me know, right? So don't Don't force your team members to work during the Easter break if they have other plans, and don't make them feel guilty about having other plans. However, if you want to work during the Easter break, you're free to do so. Okay? It's designed, this is a project which is designed to be essentially completed in 10 weeks. Right? So you should be able to do it without working during the Easter break. When I say that the final demo is after the Easter break, you might not be completely 100% finished at that final demo. Okay? But, in fact, it's highly likely that there will be bugs to fix after that final demo. But it should really just be bugs fixing you're doing at that point. The functionality should be there at that demo, with perhaps some strange little glitches. And that's the point of having it in week 10 rather than week 12, which is when you submit everything, is that when you do that demo to me as client in week 10, and I go, oh, but what about you have a chance to fix that? Okay? So after that demo in week 10, you're also going to do quality assurance on another team's project. Okay? So at that point, you bundle up yours, you hand it over to another team hands to you what they did, and you go through it, and you look for bugs, basically. Right? Now, if they find bugs in your project, it's not necessarily going to be a problem unless I, as the client, find the bugs. Because if I find the bugs, then I'll be annoyed, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to do the assessment of the quality assurance until I have done the assessment as a client of each of the individual projects. Then I will look at the quality assurance documents, and maybe your QA team will have picked up things that I as client haven't picked up. It's possible, right? So basically what I'm saying is I'm not going to let that QA process bias me against your project as a client. In the real world, of course, the QA team would be part of your project team, and that would be kind of an expected part of the process before you deliver to the client. Okay. Now, the QA needs to be finished at the end of week 11. You have one more week after that to fix any final little bugs if you want to, and you can choose to fix things that have been brought up by the QA review. Or you can choose to ignore them and hope that the client doesn't notice them. So at the end of week 12, final delivery of the software and the supporting documentation, which means like the help guides for the system, right? That type of thing. And your individual reports are due. Okay, so just like last semester, by the end of week 12, this module's finished. No exam. Time to study a few other ones. So, before this first client meeting on Wednesday, first of all, each individual needs to prepare. Think about the project. Go to that website that's in an earlier slide. Have a look at what's in the competition, about what different challenges there are and how they're judged and that sort of thing. So think about how the results are going to be recorded, which have basically, up until now, apart from one of the challenges, just been on pencil and paper. And so they fill in a form on a piece of paper, then that gets taken to the central station, gets entered into the computer, and things go wrong. Right? So think about that. Think about what questions you have for me as the client. So what are you going to ask? find out more about what is required. Think about what you think the system might look like, so that you have some suggestions for when you're talking to me as a client, and I can say, yeah, that's kind of the sort of thing that I think, or no, that wouldn't meet my needs or whatever. You know, I can give you that feedback. And you know, what do you need to know? And then meet as a team to agree upon a list of questions, because quite likely as individuals you'll come up with similar questions, so make sure that you have just one central list. And agree on your team roles. So are you going to have a manager? Are you going to have one manager for the entire time? Or are you going to rotate that during this, you know, are you going to have a different manager each week? Or I definitely would recommend when you're talking about meetings, have somebody who chairs the meeting. So you have an agenda, and the chair's main responsibility is to ensure that you are following the agenda and discussing the items on the agenda. If you go off topic, the chair can say, no, we need to come back to this, or they can say, okay, let's add this as other business at the end of the agenda, but we'll come back to it when we've discussed these other, somebody to keep you on track. Also, for every formal meeting, make sure you've got somebody who's taking the minutes, writing down the discussion that is happening, who said what you agreed upon, who agreed to do what and when. Make sure that's recorded. Okay? So when you meet, go through that process. Okay, so agenda item 1 will be, what questions will we ask the client? Or maybe that's agenda item 2 and agenda item 1 is, how are we going to divide up the team roles? But you have that list of items that you want to discuss. Okay, so in future, next week, we'll be looking at recording activities, or working as a team in general, recording activities. So I've just talked a little bit about how you should go about that, but I'll talk a bit more formally. About how to deal with the differences in your teams, about how to treat that as a strength rather than a weakness, those differences, and what to do when things go wrong. Okay, and when I say what to do when things go wrong, hopefully you can still deal with it internally within your team. But if you ever get to a point where you can't, then let me know. Okay? Definitely let me know. So that's next week. Then week 3, we'll look more at the development of your project. You should have enough requirements at that stage that starts to be a sensible thing to be thinking about. In week 4, we'll talk about design and risk management. Right. So we've already talked about design and risk management for engineering last semester. We'll talk about it in the more practical, concrete sense of this particular project. And then finally, the last lecture, formal lecture, is on testing and quality assurance. If it feels later in semester that we need some more formal teaching, I will arrange to book a room. Fortunately, you're such a small class that shouldn't be a problem. We should be able to get a space. But those are the key topics that I want to make sure we cover. If anything comes up that you would like to cover in more depth, let me know and I'll see if I can arrange it. Okay? What questions have you got? Hopefully lots by Wednesday. Okay? As I say, I'll aim to have the teams up on Mole by early tomorrow morning.